So today we're going to go over how we recommend setting up baby enclosures. So this size enclosure that we're showing you is good for animals from this size, which are hatchlings, up to this size, which are large juveniles. Now, once the waste products get a little too big for the size of the enclosure, we recommend going up to the next size, which we will show you in a minute. This is a Goro, by the way. Cute little Goro baby. And that first one was a melanistic island gecko. This is a lot of controversy about this, and a lot of people are keeping them incorrectly, which causes retarded growth, which can affect adult geckos. It can cause deformities, undershot jaws, which can happen a lot. So the way that we recommend setting up babies is something simple like this for a hatchling. This is a Container Store shoebox. That's about $2.49. What we recommend doing is putting mulch in the bottom. This is Keeper's Choice, but you could use any type of cypress mulch. And a decent thick layer, but nothing crazy. Now keep in mind, hatchling leachies don't really climb up in the trees much, because if they did, they'd be eaten by the adults. So what do I do with the coconut? So something like a coconut hide on one side, a water dish on the other side that can hold a food container. And we like to give them some climbing branches if we can find something that will stay up a little. There we go. So a climbing branch and a little tube. We try to fill this up, as much as we can, because the gecko doesn't use the air space in the cage. Any air space that's in there is not used by the gecko. They don't fly. So we try to give them as many climbing surfaces as we can, so that they have many different areas, and they're not going to be on their fecal matter very often. Now, when we first set this up, this mulch is a little moist already, so I might not do a lot of spraying. Of course, I'm going to fill up the water dish, and our food will be put here. If this is a hatchling or a newborn baby and it's not eating right away, a lot of times I like to tilt the dish like this. The reason for that is if I use a bottle cap, they'll climb through the food and get it all over their feet, which can cause issues. When I put it like this, there's not a lot of chance of them climbing on it or in it, but it's still easily accessible to them. So I find this to be the best way. Now, once this bedding does start to dry out over time, and I do not drill holes in this enclosure because there are spacers in this lid, okay? When you snap it on, it's very good at holding humidity, but it's not airtight. So if anybody's done any kind of chemistry studies, you know that molecules seek a level of equilibrium. So oxygen molecules will constantly enter the cage and carbon dioxide molecules will exit the cage. So there's plenty of aeration. However, it doesn't need to be ventilation. Keeping 80% humidity all the time is super important. But the most important thing is we don't want a wet enclosure. So, if this were drying out on this side, right in the beginning, I probably wouldn't spray it much, just water in the dish. But once it starts to dry out, what we recommend doing is filling the water and then spilling a little bit of water in this area on the corner here. With the top on, this will eventually cause the whole cage to have nice humidity, but none of this will be wet. And that's super important because if they have wet furnishings, they can get a skin infection. So super important to keep that in mind when you're setting up your hatchling enclosures. Once the hatchlings are above the size that we showed you, we then move them to the next size enclosure, and that enclosure would be for juveniles up to subadults. And we're going to take this apart. So it's sort of the same thing. We're going to, so here's dry mulch. So what I might do is keep the dry towards the one side, put the moist bedding on the one side, because we always want a dry side and a moist side so that they can hydro-regulate. Probably not going to use a coconut in here, but we're going to use, of course, our water dish on the wet side. We want to try to get a branch to hold things up in here, which kind of helps to make things, make a happy little house for them. We're going to put a cork tube on the bottom, the branch, a cork tube on the top. And again, we're kind of filling as much of the inside as we can, keeping in mind that they don't use the airspace per se. That's too big. Maybe a little one on the side here. So now there's plenty of different areas for him to climb. He's got his water dish in there. When we put the food in, at this size, we don't need to put it on its side. We can put it right down in the corner here. And again, it keeps them from smearing through it. When we spray, if this enclosure gets dry, we might spray this corner only. Again, keeping in mind that we want the cage to be humid but not wet. Once your top is on, plenty of climbing areas. This is actually good for young Chihuahua, for young crested geckos, gargoyle geckos, any of the Rhacodactylus. This is pretty good for any young animal that's under adulthood. Obviously with Leachianus, once they get to be a decent size, we're going to go up to the next size again. All right, there you go.